So let's move on to the next round. We have our session on economic geography and competitiveness, and we have a great panel here. So may I actually welcome Pirojsha Sarkari, who's the CEO for Mahindra Logistics, to come here. Harvinder Singh, who's the country manager for United Airlines. Trond, who's the director for Telecom Ramble India. Kevin Stolarik, who's with the Rotman School of Management, and also with the Institute for Competitiveness, and Paul Jensen from EBTC. Could we actually have you on the dais, please? We'll start in a minute because we're just opening the doors for the previous next hall actually. So we'll just start in half a minute exactly. Great. So thanks a lot for being here. In fact, I'll throw out my first question. In fact, if you really look at this whole idea of economic geography and competitiveness, what we're really seeing is that the importance of geography, the importance of the idea of development of states, the development of cities, or the development of districts. And if you really look at the kind of development or the change that we are seeing in the country, even with the new government, they're also talking about competitiveness of smaller villages. We are seeing the whole huge push towards smart cities, or we are actually saying that how states would actually be taking a lead in terms of development of industry or development of processes in the country. So there is a whole huge debate that is actually happening or raging around, and it's been happening for the last 20 years, but India is actually unveiling itself on a newer path. From an academic point of view, it's very clear that economic geography is the unit of analysis. If you're able to provide for a good environment to operate in, that is when the firms would actually become competitive. So a country is as good, or its productivity or its competitiveness is as good as the productivity of its firms. So we need to actually create the right environment and the right processes. But here I would like to ask Kevin. Kevin, what's your view on the whole idea of economic geography and competitiveness? What's the importance? And how, from an academic point of view, and the work that you've done on cities and the work you've done on provinces, what's your experience and what's the importance of it?
Okay, that's probably not, yeah. Probably more of a dissertation than an actual answer. Something quick, but I think the key thing in terms of really understanding the kind of smaller units, one of the points that I often make about when people are making kind of a location decision about their firm and where they want to put it, people are not deciding, I mean, they may be deciding to come to India, but they're not going to end up coming to India. I mean, they're going to come to Chennai, they're going to come to Bangalore, they're going to come to Delhi, they're going to settle somewhere, right? Pick an actual location. And so what you really see is what's driving the economy, even at the national level, is what's happening locally. And so much of what really is going on is what Roger Martin, the former dean at the Rotman School at UT, likes to call jurisdictional advantage. Right? The idea that, in fact, within a geography, within a jurisdiction, whether it's a state level or municipal level, combination of the two, that really is an important driver of the overall both competitiveness and prosperity of regions.
In fact, that is something very important, but your work in the area of, say, the 3 T's that you've actually been talking about, technology, tolerance, and technological assets, how would you really look at the application of that work within a context like India, and especially in the light of demographic dividend that we've been talking about?
Well, so the whole thing with the three T's, right, really is that prosperity is being driven by technology and innovation, talent, the talent and skilled people, as well as talent and diversity. And it's not just about, I mean, diversity actually brings its own innovation dividends as well. And so what you really see as you look at regions, and especially work that we've done in India, looking at both the states as well as the major cities, and you start to see, right, these ideas, these concepts, which we've seen a lot in the US and Europe, still having a lot of sway in terms of what's going on here. The same basic ideas of what's going on within at that regional level with the technology, with the talent and skilled people, and with the diversity of that region are actually things that are really helping to drive regional prosperity and help make resources.
Great. Paul, if I really get you in here, in fact, you've been talking about a region. You come from Europe, and as a representative of, say, EBTC, your work has actually led you to actually collaboration between different regions in this country, a different set of enterprises. How do you think these two are different, and what are the kind of learnings that we can draw from, say, from Europe for India, or from India to Europe?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I've been in India for 9.5 years now. I came with a small German company, set up shop here, and I've now for the past 1.5 years been in the European Business and Technology Center, supporting companies trying to set up collaboration, not necessarily setting up in India. And nonetheless, 9.5 years, I'm afraid I have more questions than I have answers. I mean, I can tell you about my learnings, and I think that's also very interesting. But Kevin is very right. I mean, we have a tendency to look at India as one big entity, but India is actually 29 Indias, or even more. We were discussing this morning, and it's a fact that we work a lot with technologies. What EBTC does is very technology focused, technology-based, technology collaboration, technology transfer. And transferring a water quality monitoring system to India, which is very, very relevant to India, is difficult because you will have to adapt it differently to Kolkata than you would to Tamil Nadu, than you would to Gujarat, because the water issues in each of these districts and areas are very, very different. So that's why it's important to realize you need to work with many partners, and you're not supposed to look. You should not consider having one exclusive agent for all of India. You need to really dig in and understand what's your product and just really deliver towards what India really requires. Now, you go the next step. If you say, yes, I understand those challenges, and you say, okay, I probably need to manufacture in India to be competitive on price of India. India is extremely cost-conscious, extremely cost-competitive. Then we need to look into all these data of the states, of the regions, of the districts, and of the cities. And for foreign companies coming to India, if they're setting up shop here, there's a lot of different metrics that they want to measure this on. So it's not only about the data and how the economy, what's the skill level, all these natural metrics. It's also about if you are planning on sending people across, they're also looking at how international is this area, what are the activities that I engage in, can my children find a school to go to. So that's also very, very important elements of a decision maker who is contemplating looking at that level.
Quite interesting, Paul. Harvinder, like you are in the business of moving people. If I really put it in a very subtle way or whatever. How do you really look at the idea of economic geography? Because your biggest thing has been connecting different geographies and making people go from one geography to the other. And how do you really look at this idea of economic geography and competitiveness and its importance?
I think you're right. In terms of our business, we basically see airline as a facilitator. I'm glad what Deborah said earlier. I think Starline's played an important role to get her here, and that's what we do really. But there has to be reason for people to travel, right? I think India, I'm coming from an aviation and tourism perspective, and for that matter, maybe any industry which is kind of set up in India. And you know, Paul rightly mentioned it's 29 states and like 29 countries. But the point is that every single state has to identify the strength of its geography. So that is, I think, something that which needs to be done. We've been talking about inclusiveness. We've been talking about integration, working together, PPPs, and all those things, and that's yet to take place, I would say. But from the aviation perspective, I think every single point of geography has to develop on its own, has to be self-sustaining, to make sure that people do travel. And if we talk about, I think any of the airlines probably based in India, and I'm not representing the domestic airlines here, but generally, from the industry, I feel that there's always a little bit of apprehension in terms of whether they should fly to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, because they don't know whether they'll be able to sustain that kind of cost. So I think from the point of geographical competitiveness, I think it's still a long way from the state's perspective to really realize their potential and really set up the way they should be so that people do travel to those states.
Awesome. Phil, your business clearly is the movement of goods, right? So how do you enable the competitiveness of regions? And how do you think it actually changes with different sets of geographies or different set of provinces in this country?
I think if you look at historically, the entire distribution system in India is not based on market-driven parameters, but is based on tax parameters. We have the state taxes and the central taxes. And because of duplication of taxes, what has happened is every organization has had to develop some kind of organization in each state. We enable this, of course, by moving through all the state borders and making sure that the goods are received on time. But what is really going to exponentially change is the introduction of GST in the country. Once GST comes in, the entire way of looking at distribution in this country is going to change. And I'm sure companies are preparing for this in advance.
What you're saying is the importance of tax policy out here, and you feel that there is a difference in terms of like how taxation could actually be really living out in different sets of states. But how do you think that could actually have an impact on competitiveness of a certain state? Because that's going to be one important thing. You might have seen some differential in terms of development of states because of this tax policy itself.
So like I said, every state has its own entry tax and sales tax today, and that is coupled with the central tax. The competitiveness has not come about due to taxation. The competitiveness goes back to history in India. As we all know, India was historically a supply-based economy, and therefore organizations would set up one production house in the country and distribute throughout the country. That production house basically got set up with two criteria. One is access to power, and the second is access to infrastructure. Now, access to power in India is basically through coal. As you know, coal is the main commodity for power in India. So, states which had coal got manufacturing over there, and states which were coastal, since coal could be imported, got manufacturing set up there. I think we are moving now to a more demand-driven economy. Consumption is increasing in the country, and as consumption is increasing, no organization wants to depend on a single unit to meet that consumption. So they have to have multiple units of production in the country. And therefore, it is very critical for them to now look at where next they set up their production. But it still will come back in India to where is power available. So I think that is the key crux in the country.
So what you're saying is that we are moving into a demand-driven system, wherein the whole idea wherever demand exists, that's where enterprises would actually go. And you also made a very important point, and that was that wherever power was available, that is where people have actually gone. Do you see that this is a clear evidence in India? Do you think Tamil Nadu was an example of that, or Gujarat was an example of that, or anything else? Because power was getting created in Bihar, and it probably never took the stage as to what it should have then.
So, like I said, it is dual. It is power and it is accessibility. And accessibility came through the coastal states, and therefore you saw Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, these are the states that really attracted the investment in the earlier years. Coal was available up north, and therefore certain iron ore industries were set up there. But ultimately, today in India, when multinational companies come in for setting up their operations, it has become dual. Gone are the days where they set up operations only for Indian consumption. Today, if you look at it, they are setting up operations partly for Indian consumption and partly for export. And therefore, nearness to coastal areas is very, very critical. I'll give you one classic example of the automotive industry. If you look at the automotive industry today in India, they are all clustered down south in Tamil Nadu. 50% of their production is exported. And the export ratio is going up. The domestic consumption of those automotive products that are coming out of these factories is going down. And therefore it is very critical for them to be next to the port.
So, I know like what you're saying, but I have to come back to you, Kevin. This is an important point here. When you say the emergence of a certain cluster or the emergence of a certain region, say Tamil Nadu as an automotive hub, and then exactly what Phil was saying, Gujarat and Maharashtra probably contributing to about 45% of India's exports. How do you think it is important for development of regions, or how regions could actually look at this aspect and understand and create competitiveness for themselves, create the right environment for businesses to be successful?
Well, I think it, I mean, as for the addition of power, right, the whole infrastructure piece is, I think, an incredibly important one, right? Because infrastructure itself is very location specific. Part of what makes infrastructure is the places where you put it. And so I think what you see in terms of kind of for other places and to understand what's going on is that it is what kind of infrastructure do you have, what's in place, what's going to be there. I have spent, I haven't been here as long as Phil has, but I've been here, I think this is my 5th trip now. I would say last year when I was here, I did 35 cities in India in 35 days. So I have seen more of India than most Indians. But a large part of that time was actually spent on the roads. And I can tell you, I never want to be in an Indian road again. They are the worst, except when you're by the border regions where the military takes care of them for obvious reasons. Other than that, the roads in this country suck. So if you don't have that kind of, the infrastructure you have, and it's very difficult. I don't blame anyone for it because, I mean, the sheer volume of trucks that are traveling on those roads, as they're trying to upgrade the roads, they've got all these trucks on them. So how do you kind of balance both the growth and the need to build infrastructure? But if you don't have that, if you don't have those infrastructure pieces in place, it's very, very difficult to be competitive and to be successful.
It's quite interesting. Sean, I have to bring you here. In fact, like, what Kevin was saying is that basic infrastructure is a problem. But you are an enterprise, and your experience of actually enabling telecoms and being a service industry, how do you think the whole concept of economic geography has actually changed, and how you have actually enabled that change?
Well, first of all, when you look at the country as India, as mentioned here, it's 29 states. And 29 countries, people were saying. It is the size that you can compare it to, it's the 9th biggest country in the world. It's bigger than Europe. So of course, there's a big difference if from north to south, east to west. And what we also see and what we focus on in our company, deploying telecom towers, is like before in India, telecom towers were just the same. You just put them, you might invest and produce them and put them anywhere. We go in and we look at if it's coastal area, if it's the wind zones, soils, everything. So that way we look at different areas of India. When it comes to economics, and of course you have to look at, what am I going to produce? Am I going to do it for the local people, or am I going to do it for export? So coastal areas, ports, logistics is a huge problem for us. It's a huge problem. Having transport is not common, but our partners manufacturing towers because of the infrastructure on the roads. The road tax, all these things, but it's like 29 different countries. It's extremely difficult for us to transport from one place to another. When it comes to the education system, of course we look at it when we put our office down and when we invested in certain parts of India. And that's why I think that there's a huge work pool in India. 1.2 plus billion people. So if you imagine the amount of unskilled workers or blue-collar workers, and these blue-collar workers are not educated. Unfortunately, this many people are not educated. If India invested in these people and gave them a basic education, any part of India could be a financial gold mine, because we really need this educated people, working class. And that's also the difference when you look at like Europe. 50 years ago, we were very much similar to India. Pollution, big differences in poor and rich. And then we invested in giving the people who was working as carpenter, whatever, an education, a diploma that actually went through this education system. And that's how we changed our country from being very similar to India, except for the country, to what it is now, Europe.
Awesome, Sean. And you said something very, very interesting, and you said something on talent and the availability of talent of a certain region. Do you think there is a difference between different cities, or how would you actually make that assessment? Because that becomes a very important aspect. When you're talking about offices or opening offices, like opening it in Hyderabad or Mumbai or Delhi or whatever, is it just a talent decision, or there is going to be something else as well that you would push into?
No, there's culture and people's attitude. Like I was living in Chennai for 2 years, 7 years back, and no offense to anybody, but the people from Tamil Nadu is maybe a little shorter, a little more, you know, they're very happy because they're protected by the strong northern Indians. So there's a big difference in attitude of how people welcome you in their home from south to north. So that is where you see the difference in India. And also when we look at, when we travel around, there's a big difference in India that way.
You've touched a very interesting chord here, but I have to come to Paul here. In fact, Paul, your experience of being in India 9.5 years and being in different regions, like, do you actually subscribe to what Trond is saying, or you would have a different view?
No, I don't have a different view, and I'm thin ice as well. No, I can tell you how things developed in 5 years in my previous company. It was based here in Delhi, and the tendency was exactly to hire more and more people from South India. And it didn't have anything to do with qualifications on paper. It had to do with attitude and dedication and passion for the work that's being done. And the amount of times that I, as an employer, felt, yeah, it's a rough word, but blackmailed by employees who came and say, boss, I can get 5,000, 10,000 rupees more on the other side of the street. You match it, I'll stay, otherwise I'll go. And the amount of times I had to say, well, have to go, I'll find someone else. But the challenge of being in Delhi and having more South Indians is that the South Indians, unfortunately, don't feel too much at home in Delhi. And they feel like foreigners in their own country. So if I'm complaining about being ripped up by the taxiwala, so is the South Indian. Yeah, so it's completely subscribed, and it's a difficult choice. But I have to say, at that time, there was extremely high pressure on employment. Today, it's a bit different. People are not so pushy in the jobs today.
So whether it is actually about like your willingness to pay more to a taxi guy, or it is actually extraction of money, but I think, Kevin, you would like to say something on very interesting in terms of saying it's about tolerance, because that's the work that you do. And do you think there is an issue of tolerance here then? Because it runs into the broader aspect of tolerance, and it actually has an impact on economic geography and competitiveness.
I could talk about this one forever and dig myself an even deeper hole. So the tolerance and diversity thing is really important, but I think it's important actually there is a social element of it that is really important, and I do not want to discount that, but there also is a really strong economic argument, and that is if you actually look at people who have put teams together and who really look at trying to understand what happens when you have diverse teams trying to do things versus very homogeneous teams. And I've done some of this work actually in Montreal, and we did a bunch of stuff around language and issues around language, both French and English, but other languages as well, that get spoken quite a bit in Montreal. And what you see is that, in fact, teams that are more diverse, that have more diverse people on them, are more successful. They come up with better ideas, they're simply smarter, they're more innovative, they're more creative, because you've got diverse people. And that can be youth, that can be women, that can be people of different religious backgrounds, that can be people from different parts of India. So there actually is a real strength to diversity if you can figure out how to tap into it. Now, there's a lot of costs associated with diversity as well. right? And that's the other side of it, right? I said, the Tamils living in Delhi who still feel like they're getting ripped off like the taxi guys, just like us colored guys are, right? Yes, this is what happens, right? So there are some real challenges, I think, but I think the key thing is actually recognizing that it's an incredibly powerful thing, and India has been a place that has, in so many ways, celebrated its diversity, and said, no, we are a diverse society, right? Whether or not, whether it's religion, whether it's part of the country, all kinds of other things, right? But in fact, right, India has always, I think, been a place that said, no, we need to kind of celebrate and really appreciate that diversity. And so I think what you see, and it also goes back to this issue of kind of why cities, right? Why cities are actually the places that help bring diverse people together. Port cities do it more than other cities, right? So bringing together people from Europe, you talk about what's going on, with the Japanese in Gujarat, or what's going on with the Germans in Pune, right? And what's happening with various places with the Koreans in Chennai, right? So you actually have places as well that are bringing people from the rest of the world. And as Paul said, right, one of the real issues as well is, do you actually have the kind of amenities in your region to make yourself attractive to the people that are coming from the rest of the world? Because if they don't feel like they have a good place to live, if they don't feel like they have a good place to send their kids to go to school, you're going to have a really hard time tapping into that kind of global diversity as well.
Great. Phil, on this, or developing on this thought, he says that diversity is important, but then in case when we are celebrating diversity, is this a contradiction from your point of view to the whole idea of economic geography, or still you would think that we have to look at India as 29 different ideas rather than just one single thing, or 29 different states, not as an idea. I think India is an idea, but then as 29 different states.
I think he's touched upon a very critical point over here, and that is building cities. And wherever we see that people from different states come into a city, that city really prospers, because then there is true diversity. We say India is diverse, but when you go to state levels, still that diversity does not exist at state level. But when you come to metro cities, and especially port cities, that's where you see real diversity in its true sense. So the more we create these cities and let there be people coming from various parts of India into that city to settle down, you will see more and more diversity, which will help.
Harvinder, when you talk about cities here, this is an important aspect that we are actually looking at. In your business, in your experience, the diversity is also driven by cities, and you connect cities. How do you think this gets challenged or has got challenged over a period of time? I think the world is globalized, changed dramatically in the last 30, 40 years, and especially with travel. How do you think this is getting challenged as an idea, or probably just supporting the idea?
I think from India point of view, if we talk about on the macro level, the aspiration of the country is excellent. We are, if we talk about the aviation, we are in top 10 worldwide. With 16 billion, worth of aviation size. If we go by the figures, if we go by what we read and the growth which is happening, it's going to be probably be number 3 in 2020. The tourism is growing like multiple folds the way it is. There's a lot more potential. If you look at the other examples, for example, Singapore, Dubai, they've really thrived, on the tourism part and what you've created around tourism. So I think India has that potential, and as I said earlier, in terms of our job is connecting people, and if India has the aspiration to become a hub, for example, like Delhi and Bombay to become hubs for people to move around, and also not just within India, maybe to South Asia otherwise, the other geographical parts of India have to be developed. So I keep coming back to the point in terms of tier 2 and tier 3 cities. We've heard about things like brain drain coming from tier 1 cities to any other country, but we've also heard about labor drain coming from tier 2 or tier 3 cities to tier 1 cities. So that puts a lot of load on tier 1 cities. You see what's happening at the airports and stuff like that. So I would probably think, from the airline perspective, developing those cities, giving more incentives and subsidies. Phil talked about the taxation part. The airlines face taxation on the ATF, the turbine fuel and stuff like that. That's too huge. So I think in terms of making it competitive, it's just to help carriers the airlines to make sure that they travel and I think, fly to those destinations. And I think overall, the intent to reach that kind of aspiration is good. So I think that work needs to be done at the ground level. That's what I feel.
Okay. Yes, Kevin.
Well, just a quick one, because we're on the point. We were talking about infrastructure and how important and ports. The one thing to keep in mind, right, is the airport is really kind of the new port. So if you look at a place like Hyderabad or Mangalore, which don't have seaports, but yet their airports are an incredibly important part of their connectivity to the rest of the world. And that really, when you start, especially talking about like the tier 2 cities, the airports become such an important part because of that connectivity, because of that ability to bring people from all over India and all over the world.
Okay, and Tron, your comment on this, like if you really look at this idea in terms of like the cities and the economic geography here, did you think services business differ, or it's just a simple principle that's going to be applicable to manufacturing businesses and services businesses?
No, I don't think it's only services that needs to change. This is, in my opinion, like if how can I put that in words that people can understand? Can you ask in kind of a different way, because I think I'm answering in that direction.
No, okay. So what I say is, like, if you really talk about cities, do you think services business will have to think about cities differently, or manufacturing businesses will have to think differently, or it's the similar or same set of principles that are applicable in terms of understanding cities?
No, but the cities, I don't see it's cities as is. I think it's the whole setup here that needs to change.
Oh, okay.
It is the I don't think it's that the government in a state or a city. I think it's the whole country that needs to change.
Oh, okay. So you're saying the governance mechanism will have to really redefine itself. That's a very interesting point. Yes. In fact, I would like to open the floor if you have any questions here, sir. Any questions from the floor, please? Mr. Bhagat, yes.
Dr. Kapoor, I must compliment you first for organizing this event. I am a member of all the Apex chambers and also the managing committee of some of them. But my knowledge about competitiveness, I must say, was very, very small. Hearing this panel and talking to you, I think there's a very important role you have to play in the current context of what our Prime Minister is moving, and moving very fast. He wants everything to be done yesterday. So I'd like to know something about this institution. For example, to make India means that there has to be quite a bit shift of bringing technology, investment from abroad, benchmarking, what are the competitiveness of our industrial giants and our states and cities and all. There are dozens of parameters which need to be measured. Can you tell us something how you are going to do? And is Madame who is visiting from US, is she meeting our Minister of Commerce, Nirmala? And if I may recommend, you need to introduce her to Yogindra Mishra, the PMO Secretary, because you need to do some effective contribution.
No, thanks a lot for the suggestion here. Any questions? And yes. I'll get back to you, Mr. Bhagat, on this on a separate thing. But we have a question here from the audience, please.
Hello. Hello, I'm Ravinder Singh. I'm an inventor. Good morning to you all. Sir, it is very critical that, we pay only $20 billion to our workers, factory workers. So how much, technologies they can develop, how much technologies they can implement. That's a very, very critical thing. We are paying very low wages to our technical workers, factory workers.
So the question is on the payment to the factory workers. Do you think that actually is going to have a bearing on competitiveness? Phil, if you would like to say something on this.
I think we have to look at productivity rather than the payment. Today, there is no real benchmarking on productivity that we do. We have come historically with a mold that we get cheap labor and therefore we can put in 10 more people and it will not really matter to us. But if we want to get competitive and in a international world today, we need to put in productivity, and productivity in today's world will require embedding technology in our processes.
Great. Any final comments from you here? Any final comments, sir? Or the closing remarks on this panel? Anything that you would like to say? Kevin?
Well, I guess I will. My one thing that I'd like to say, since we didn't get there yet, but one of the things that I do think is really important, especially with this whole area of economic geography, is I often talk about shifting really our thinking from bricks to dams. So much of what's been going on and thinking about competitiveness and global competitiveness and what's been going on, everything is focused around, right, what McKinsey called the BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, the S maybe Singapore, maybe South Africa. And I actually think that's wrong, right? And it's not that you don't have to focus and think about those things, but really, I say it's much more about the dams than it is about the BRICS. And by the dams, I mean Delhi, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, Bangalore, right? That's really where the important focus is. And so that it is very much about understanding that while competitiveness is a national thing, is an important international level, this whole forum is the National Competitiveness Forum. Don't discount that. But really, right, being nationally competitive means being regionally competitive, being competitive at the state level, being competitive at the municipality level, being competitive at the village level. Right? If you're not doing that, then you're not going to be competitive at the national level. And that what you really have to think about, and why this whole idea of kind of the new economic geography and why that's so important, is because that really is what's driving it, right? It's not the BRICS, it is the dams.
Paul, any comments? 30 seconds, please. No more than that.
30 seconds. Just a quick one on clusters, because it's really about regions, and in Europe as well as in the US, clusters are an important element of the innovation ecosystem. If we're talking about innovation to enhance productivity, to enhance competitiveness, I think clusters is one area we have to look at. And cluster managers in Europe, for instance, are tasked to internationalize their services for their cluster members. They come to India, want to find counterparts. They want to find cluster managers in India and are unable to do so. Yeah, and that would be one really good connect to enable collaboration and be.
I think what you've said is very important, because the whole idea of clusters in India is so weak and so nascent. And I think, and thanks to many interesting organizations in the country, which I don't want to name, especially UNIDO, but I think they've actually made a mess and hash of it. But Harvinder, like anything, the last final comments?
No, I think in terms of competitiveness on the state level, I think what they really all, in terms of these tier 2 and tier 3 cities, strengthening them, identifying the strengths, working on the skills so that they can be self-sustained, developing the youth. It's not just the degrees that we need, management degrees. I think we need to develop the skills so that, for example, tourism, the industries that can develop around that, and, the economies can become a little more self-sustained.
Phil, your 15 seconds.
I think just one topic I want to touch on, competitiveness in India. I think we have to recognize that there is a large majority of ladies, women force over there, which needs to be brought into key critical roles in Indian organizations. I think that is important.
Okay. Tron, any final comments?
No, I would say that it takes 2 to 4 weeks to get a visa to India. Lower that process, get better, grid system in India. Power is a real big issue. Logistics, and then focus investing in your huge pool of labor.
Okay, I think that's what we are talking about, the bureaucracy and the bureaucratic structures we have, and we have to change that. And Sunand has some great opinion and ideas on it. I'm sure he's going to touch when he's going to talk, but thanks a lot to the panelists here. Thank you, so kind of you. Here. So he wants a picture.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was a swell macro look at competitiveness. I'm reminded of a great book by Kenichi Owai, The Invisible Continent, where this ex-McKinsey guy talks of a larger continent which is beyond geographic land masses we study in our schools. He talks of internet, WWWs, which our next session is about. But before that, I would like to thank all our esteemed panelists and a great moderator for this fantastic session.
Help me with the... Oh, okay.